I'll give us about maybe 2 minutes. I can see it on the top of my screen here how many people are viewing. And yeah. Hey, good morning or good evening, wherever you're joining. You're just waiting for more people to join. Give us another minute. Welcome to those joining. We're just waiting for people to join the session. Welcome to those joining us. Okay, maybe just 30 more seconds. Okay. I think it's a good time to start now. Okay. So, hello to everyone joining. Welcome to another live stream talk. This is the first talk to kick off our new SEN Explained speaker series. And the aim of this series is to move the needle forward on the conversation around special educational needs and begin new holistic dialogues using first-hand knowledge and experience across SEN. So we have a very special guest today who I'll introduce in a moment. My name is Valenza. I work at SEN Talk. We are a charity based in South London, dedicated to transforming social and emotional determinants of well-being and promoting societal inclusion at large for children and young people with special educational needs and their families. If you're joining us live, feel free to add your questions and comments in the live chat. We'll try to respond to as many of them as we can after the presentation today. If you are watching the YouTube recording, please add your questions and comments below and continue the discussion. With all that said, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Emma Goodall, an autistic adult and autism researcher, author, consultant, and education professional who has taught, consulted, and written policy across a wide range of educational and disability settings in Australia, New Zealand, England, and mainland Europe. Her work is focused on enabling families and educators to understand differences in autistic and non-autistic thinking and work with autism spectrum children and adults in a positive way. With all that said, today's discussion will center on bridging gaps in what we understand about autism and interoception as a toolkit for creating greater inclusion and well-being for children and young people on the spectrum. Emma, welcome. I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks very much, Valenza. So, as Valenza said, we're going to be looking at inclusive environments in focusing on autism and interoception. So, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work at the moment, the Kaurna people, and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. So I'm based in South Australia, in Australia at the moment. I just thought I'd introduce myself a little bit. I'm a parent, a daughter, a sister, an educator, and as Valenza said, researcher, author. I'm also a student, even though I have a PhD. I just handed in my thesis for my master's in interoception. I'm autistic. I'm a new Australian. I got my citizenship quite recently, and I've lived and worked in about 13 countries. And my current passion is interoception. So there are some key definitions that will help to clear up before we start the talk. So I will use these words quite a lot, and it's just helpful if you're all got the same understanding of what I'm talking about. So in the live chat, if you have any questions about these definitions, please do type that in now. So dysregulated, when I use that, I'm meaning emotional or behavioural dysregulation. And what this looks like is unhelpful or harmful behaviour, and that behaviour is unhelpful or harmful to yourself or to others. And that was the definition that we used in the Department for Education in South Australia, where I used to work. Self-regulation, and this is an individual's ability to control their own thoughts, emotions, and actions. Self-management is the control or actioning of behaviours in order to fulfil biological needs. So that's slightly different than self-regulation. And self-management is really all about your balance in your body, which is also called homeostasis. So homeostasis is that a maintenance of a stable internal environment, or the balance of your internal environment, and this you need for good health. So interoception is the combination of interoceptive awareness and interoceptive accuracy, which we will go through the definition of in a little bit. Interoceptive awareness is the conscious perception of somatic or body signals. So that's the really thinking about and noticing what your body is telling you, so your internal body signals. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit more. Now, when we're thinking about thinking styles, when I put together this slide, I know it's a gross overgeneralization. So these are really sort of, if you like, almost stereotypical aspects of autistic thinking and non-autistic thinking. So generally autistics, we think in a very logical or rational way, and that is not necessarily how non-autistics would describe it. They describe it often as black and white thinking. Whereas non-autistics tend to think in very emotional or social ways, or emotional and social ways. And that's normally just described as normal thinking. But they're sort of at opposite ends of the spectrum. So you can be logical and emotional, you can be rational and social, but it's quite hard to have those together. And autistics, when we're thinking about society and that social aspect, tend to be really focused on social justice, particularly equality for all, not just people, but sometimes not people and living beings, living creatures, but also for some autistics, equality for all includes inanimate objects in it. Whereas for non-autistics, fairness is an issue, but it tends to be about fairness for some, because a social hierarchy is embedded in most non-autistic thinking and is accepted as the norm and as it should be, which it isn't for autistics. And when autistics are thinking about actions and consequences, is a very much a if-then, and it's very much rule-based and that logical and rational thought-based. Whereas when non-autistics are thinking, they're very aware of the exceptions to the rules. So it's an if, then, but. So for example, if I'm planning to go to the shops to buy some milk, the but comes in, but they might not have the milk I like, but they might have run out, but the shop might be closed. Whereas the autistic person might think, I need milk, you buy milk at the shop, so if I go to the shop, then I can buy milk and get there. And if any of those buts exist, that can cause great difficulties for us. Now, thinking in as autistics tends to be incredibly repetitive and analytical, and that it seems a little bit odd. But if you contrast that with a non-autistic thinking style, which is often what is done is done. So, for example, you were out for the day, what happened in that day is done. Whereas an autistic person gets home, or an autistic child or young person, and they analyze that day over and over again. That's what I mean by the repetitive thinking. And they're analyzing every aspect of the day. And it's very hard for us to say what has happened and just move forward. And that's really problematic for a lot of parents and professionals when working with children, young people, and adults on the spectrum, because they expect us to get over something, and possibly we might still be repetitively analyzing something from decades ago, but certainly from hours, days, and weeks ago. We're quite out of the box thinking, and really it is what box? I don't actually understand this out of the box thinking, but the non-autistic thinking style is really, this is the way it's always been done, and it's very interesting. I've been working on some change projects recently, and as an autistic I'm not supposed to like change, but I have a drive for continuous improvement, and all the non-autistics that I'm working with are really struggling to change what has always been done. We've always done it this way, and I think, but that way isn't the best way you can do it, so let's improve it. So that's another example of the way that the two thinking styles are different. Perhaps the one that most of you attending today will know about is the literal language. And I know it's not necessarily a thinking style, but it sort of is. So non-autistics think and communicate in non-literal language. When you ask somebody who is not autistic, do I look good in this? What you're actually meaning is, if you're not autistic, give me a compliment, please. Whereas if you're an autistic person and you say, hearing that, you will say, am I allowed to be truthful? Am I not allowed to be truthful? Are they asking a literal question, a non-literal question? Because if somebody asks me, do I look good in that? I'm not really sure what looking good means, but I can certainly tell them if it fits right, if it doesn't fit right. It's a very literal language. And this is really problematic in many, many situations. In school, when a teacher says, would you like to come and do your maths now? They're using non-literal language, and what they mean is, it's maths time, do your maths. What the autistic child hears is that literal question, do you want to come and do your maths? And when they say no, they get in trouble. But they're responding literally to literal language. So we really need to understand these thinking styles are really problematic if we're not aware of them and we don't cater to them. And it's quite important to think about who is doing the catering. As an adult autistic who has spent many years teaching, researching, writing, I'm reasonably bilingual, but I still get it wrong. And by bilingual, I mean autistic and non-autistic. And if I'm getting it wrong, why are we expecting children on the autism spectrum to be able to understand non-autistic thinking and communicating styles? They do have their diagnosis for a reason, and the reason is that they struggle with these things, which means that if we want to be really inclusive, we need to understand the ways that they think and communicate and meet them at least halfway, if not all the way, and then slowly start to teach them the skills to become bilingual. So in inclusive classrooms, if we want to meet them all the way, and so that everybody knows that they're welcome and valued and included, you really need to be using literal language. And in the UK context, this is really important, because for all people who are English as an additional language or haven't acquired English yet, or people who have auditory processing difficulties, language disabilities, etc., literal language, that's saying what you mean and meaning what you say, can make the difference between children and young people being able to access learning and not access. And on that, do you want to come and do your maths? Don't ever ask questions as a teacher or a parent unless you're willing to accept the answers. And this is a pitfall that many autistic children, young people, and adults fall into. We answer questions expecting that people are happy with us to be truthful in response to their question, and often they aren't. I think the third point is really important. The hidden curriculum, that is the sort of social norms and unwritten rules. These are not understood by many of us on the spectrum. So, for non autistic children and young people, within about 6 months, they've really learnt the hidden curriculum for any given context. Whereas for autistics, it can take us a very long time, if ever. And so this needs to be made really explicit to us. But also question at the same time, is this relevant and useful or not? Is this hidden curriculum, these social norms and practices, are they helpful in the education context or not? An example of hidden curriculum is when you're playing team sports. So if you're playing, for example, netball, and you're meant to pass the ball to the person who's free and open, but that's not what happens in team sports, except at an elite level. What happens is that children and young people who are non autistic pass the ball to the most popular person or the person they want to be friends with. There's so many reasons why they pass to someone. They very rarely pass to someone just because they are the person who is most free. That's a hidden curriculum thing. The autistic student will be passing the ball according to the explicit rules, and this can make them alienated from their peers. I think one of the simplest things in inclusive classrooms, I did actually train to be a teacher in London. I trained at South Bank when it was they had teacher training there, and I taught in South London for many years. And we actively talked about and promoted the value of diversity. In this side of the world where I am now, that isn't done so explicitly, and I can really see the difference in the level of inclusion in classrooms. Children and young people who don't feel that diversity is valued and who are diverse can really find themselves on the outside and feel othered. So this is all kinds of diversity, not just autism, because if you're autistic, there'll be other areas in your life that are also diverse. Most children, young people, adults on the spectrum have co-occurring mental or physical health conditions that also can place them as different and other. And obviously, we have people from all cultures who have an autism diagnosis. Lastly, in promoting inclusive classrooms, it's that teaching and learning has to really focus on those skills to notice, recognize, and helpfully express emotions. So, children and young people on the spectrum are among the highest rates of exclusion and suspension and all other unofficial forms of removal from the classroom because of this difficulty that they have in helpfully expressing their emotions. So, one of the things that people assume is that it's deliberate or that it's a part of autism, but actually it's not. What it is that most of us, when we're younger and even into quite advanced adulthood, are not able to notice, recognize our emotions and feelings. And if we can't notice and recognize them, then we can't helpfully express them. So if I don't notice I'm getting angry until I'm super angry, the likelihood of me actually being able to helpfully express that anger is very small. So autistics do have feelings and emotions just like everybody else. However, we might not notice or recognize them in ourselves and or others. However, we may notice them, but we might not recognize them. And then again, we might recognize them only when they're very intense or very strong. So if we take being scared as an emotion, there are some autistics who won't notice or recognize that in themselves, but they will in others, and vice versa. And then there are some people who might notice their body feels a bit different, but they're not sure what they're feeling. And then there might be people that don't recognize they're scared until they're petrified. And once they're petrified, then they recognize it. But that's really a difficult, much more difficult emotion to respond helpfully to. So our interoception is often atypical in autism, and in fact, it's often atypical in all neurodiverse conditions. So interoception is that eighth sense, and it enables us to notice and recognize our internal body signals. So without it, or when it's atypical, it can be really difficult to notice, recognize, or helpfully express our feelings and emotions. There are other issues that impact on children, young people, and students' ability to self-regulate and or to be able to learn. So I think some of the three biggest ones are disempowerment, disenfranchisement, and trauma. And this can be both personally experienced and intergenerational trauma. That's important in the UK context because where you have refugees and asylum seekers, it seems fairly obvious that that might impact a person's ability to self-regulate, be able to learn. However, it impacts their children and their children's children because the brain changes that come about are actually passed on to the next generation. Mental health difficulties, so for example, anxiety and depression, are extremely common in autism, and these can also impact children's ability to self-regulate and be able to learn. And obviously, if you have a self-regulation difficulty, it's going to be harder to self-regulate. So the statistics are for Australia, but these are fairly applicable and similar across all jurisdictions, so all countries. So for children and young people in Australia, it's about 1 in 4 that experiences mental health difficulties. And by the time you get into very old age, it's only 1 in 20. So you can see that it's much more prevalent in adolescence and young adulthood. However, if you then turn to children and young people with a disability, you have a single diagnosed disability, for example, autism, you have a 1 in 3 chance of experiencing a mental disorder. But if you have more than one disability, that goes up to 1 in 2. So if you're listening and you work in special educational settings, or you have lots of children in your class or on your caseload that have special educational needs, the likelihood is that they are highly susceptible to having a diagnosed mental health difficulty at some point in their life. And this is due to complex interrelationships between disability and other medical, social, and psychological factors. So it's not just down to the disability. Now, when we're talking about disempowerment, disenfranchisement, and how this impacts on individuals and their ability to self-regulate and their ability to self-manage and to learn and to feel included, this is really important because when your understanding of the world and sense of well-being is different from the majority culture, or your value is portrayed as less than other people, that disempowerment or disenfranchisement can ensue. And I think a really good example of this is around the Paralympics. So a Paralympian is viewed in a particular way during the Paralympics. So they're an athlete, they're extraordinary. The day before the Paralympics and the day after, they're disabled. And that's a very big difference. We don't seem to understand how this can lead to disempowerment or disenfranchisement. And if you add in things like ethnicity or culturally and linguistically diverse communities, hidden disabilities that are talked about very negatively in the media, such as autism, that can really lead to that disempowerment and disenfranchisement. We can present interoceptive awareness in ways that are culturally appropriate. And the examples here are to fit holistic models of well-being. So these are from Maori and Pacific cultures, which are indigenous cultures in New Zealand and the Pacific Islands. However, you can also make it culturally appropriate across all cultures. So whoever you're working with, I talked with Aboriginal Australians, migrants and refugees. And when we found culturally appropriate ways of talking about interoception, it really empowered those individuals to connect to themselves, to the country that they were now living in, and to other people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about behaviour and self-regulation now. And to do this, we're going to talk about behaviour going on a scale from 0 to 100. And so 0 is when you're sort of nice and calm and relaxed, and 100 is where you've absolutely lost the plot and you're in that very heightened panic type state. Now, within this 0 to 100, people who have that chronic stress or trauma, whether it's their own trauma or that intergenerational trauma, they can really struggle to accurately assess if they're in danger. So we're always at 100 when we're needing to have our survival instinct kicked in. So that is our survival instinct, is where we're at 100. But if you have a perceived threat and you misinterpret that, you're going to go into 100 even when there isn't a threat. So that's really important, because the more that you stay in 100, the more you stay in a hyper vigilant state, a hyper arousal state, which increases our cortisol levels, and that has a lot of impacts on our physical and mental health. So people that accurately can perceive threats, once a threat is passed, they move back down to that, towards that zero, whereas people that can't accurately assess that will often stay going back into that loop. And that also applies to those people who feel disenfranchised and disempowered. So leaving that aside, if you don't understand or notice what your body's telling you, you're not actually going to feel or show 0 to 99. So 99 is big emotions. So if you think of petrified, enraged, when you're laughing so much that you cry because the intensity of the emotion is so big. So if you can get to 99 without noticing, that means you have no opportunity to calm yourself down, because you don't realize that you need to calm yourself down. So 99 is those big emotion states when it's hard to think clearly, and it's quite useful to think about a toddler here. So when toddlers get tired, people don't often notice they're tired initially, and then they get so tired and they just lose it, and they start having a toddler tired tantrum. And that can look like different things depending on the different toddler. But the toddler doesn't have the noticing of that tired to know that they need to go to bed, to go to sleep, which would be the calm down for tired. So at 99, those feelings and emotions are in control of the individual. So this is really important. A child or young person is not in control of themselves when they're at 99. Their emotions are controlling them. And that's why that can easily become 100 when the survival instinct takes control of you. Because our brain, if we're in a very intense emotional state, can misperceive that there is a threat, and it can flick us over into that survival instinct mode. So we can use Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain to understand how different parts of our brain are in control during that 0 to 100. Now, this can be used for all people, not just children and young people on the spectrum. It can be used with adults, children. It can be used with anyone with and without special educational needs. So in this, there are 3 parts of the brain: the emotional part, the thinking part, and the survival instinct part. Mindful awareness, which is very critical for interoception, is part of the thinking cap of the brain. So in 0 to 98, that's where the thinking cap of the brain is connected, and that's where everyone can think, learn, and make choices. And when the hand is in this position, this is that model for 0 to 98, you can see I've made a little smiley face there, and that's actually the mindfulness part of the brain. So those 2 fingers that are kind of smushed into the palm of your hand, those are only connected during 0 to 98. And as soon as they're not connected, you can't actually be mindful. So in big emotions, that's at 99, it's the emotions are in control, and it's very hard for people to think, and you can't actively learn, and you can't make active choices. So when you say to a child or young person who's in a big emotion state, are you making a good choice or a bad choice, or I want you to choose what you need to do now, they actually can't do that. So we're setting them up for failure. We're not having an inclusive classroom at that point. We're setting them up in the home for success. 100 is that panic, that survival instinct, and that is literally the instinct takes over, and we can't think, learn, or make choices. We can't really do anything at that state other than let that survival instinct run its course. So as we develop our interoception, which is that noticing and recognizing of our emotions, as we start to develop that more and more, we can start to feel our emotions before they're big. And this means we can do something about it, and that will prevent that overload or that flipping the lid. So when I finish the presentation, I will do the hand model of the brain again on camera so that you can see how it works in action as it's moving from one to the other. So when we're thinking about feeling our emotions before they're big and being able to do something about it, that means we can go from 0 to 98 and stay within that. Sometimes we can get to 99 and bring it back down, but we can't do anything about it when we're in 100. So we can also calm ourselves down by doing interoception activities. Now this works because of that mindfulness part of the brain which is activated by doing the interoception activities. But it's only active when you're at 99 or less. When you're at 100, you need to be kept safe, and calming down comes later. Now, our ability to experience feelings or emotions, and those, as we now know, impact behaviour, they're controlled by the interoception centre of the brain. You don't need to really worry about what's on here. You can have a copy of this presentation anyway. The important thing is that all the different theories about emotions all incorporate this interoceptive awareness, that perception of body changes. So it's a fairly universal accepted idea now, and it has been around since the 1970s. It's just there wasn't a lot of research done until the last sort of 10 years. And the difference between self-management and self-regulation I explained at the beginning. This is just a nice pretty way of explaining it too. So homeostasis is a balance. It's like a seesaw. When it's out of balance and something prompts it to go out of balance, the body change is noticed and interpreted by the brain and then responded to, and then the body goes back into balance. Whereas self-regulation is very much about self-expression and social emotional interactions, and that's in ways that are helpful to yourself and to others. When we're thinking about the interoception skills required to be able to self-regulate and self-manage, it's everything in our internal body. So all the organs, all the nerves, all the blood systems, everything. We need to be able to notice all of them changing, and we need to be able to recognize them in order to be able to self-regulate. And if you think of a simple thing of your intestines, so when you have a funny feeling in your intestines, and if you don't recognize what that is, it's going to be very hard to self-regulate the emotions that follow, because if you haven't noticed that your tummy is feeling a bit funny because you're actually feeling quite unwell, you won't take yourself to somewhere safe to vomit. Whereas it could be that you're not noticing that your tummy is feeling funny because you actually quite like somebody and you want to spend more time with them. And so not noticing that, you probably won't do that. So you haven't been able to self-manage and self-regulate yourself in a way that's helpful to you. Now, there are 4 steps to self-regulation. The first step is the very basic of it, and that's noticing what your body is telling you. So, am I feeling something at all? And then the second step is to really understand what your body is telling you. So then you have to put those together with being able to accurately understand the context. So even if you have 1 and 2, if you misinterpret whether there is danger or not, it's still going to be very hard to self-regulate, because you'll flip over into that survival instinct and you don't need to. If you don't have 1, 2, or 3, then you're going to need co-regulating whenever any of those aren't achieved. Whereas if you do have them all, then you're at step 4, which is being able to respond helpfully to all of the steps below. And these sit on that background of the biological and brain drive for balance of the body and survival instinct. I already explained that. Now, if we want to change interoceptive awareness, if we want to improve it for children and young people and adults who don't have typical interoceptive awareness, we're really relying on neuroplasticity, which means that the brain continues to grow and learn. And we know this because research tells us the brain will change with new learning, and that new learning can support those structural changes. There's been research to prove that children with disabilities get improved brain connections whilst they're improving their mathematical skills too. So we know that we can use the principles of neuroplasticity in teaching individuals. Another area was children, young people, adults who had post-traumatic stress disorder were taught to self-regulate behaviour, and this was done using some neuroplasticity research too. Now, in case you think I'm an autistic adult who's just so obsessed with my interoception that I've made all the rest of it up, I thought I'd share with you some of the feedback from the 2 years of trials that I did in South Australia with our schools and the students and families. So this student said, I think teachers should teach interoception because it helps teachers and students to be calm and to learn. Interoception has helped me to be calm and help my friends in class. These students are talking about interoception being peaceful and calming, that it helps them calm down and refocus on their work. And I think this is really important because when we think about inclusive classrooms, we don't always think about how hard it is for non-autistic and autistic children and young people to work together in the same environment. Children and young people are very social. They have very different needs from children and young people who are craving quiet and order. So it can be really difficult for the two to work together. And if we have a way of helping everybody to be calm and refocus on their work, that really can improve the inclusive aspect of a classroom.
I like interoception because it keeps me calm and ready for the next lesson and helps me become focused, and also it helps my classmates and me to get over the stuff that's happened at recess or lunch.
That was a young man who had a very challenging time at school until he was learning interoception, and then he was able to successfully manage school and stop being regularly suspended and excluded from school. So leadership also found teaching interoception very useful because it did decrease their behaviour issues. Students were able to self-regulate emotions much more easily after about 8 to 10 weeks. This is not a very quick fix, teaching interoception. It does take about a term. However, the staff across both preschool, primary school and high school noticed that the interoception activities really enabled students with opportunities to connect to their bodily responses to their emotions. This particular high school, the culture changed significantly after the school had been doing interoception for a year. So we can increase engagement in learning when we can decrease sympathetic nervous system overload, and those are those stress hormones and chemicals that activate the survival instinct. So if we can decrease those, we can increase engagement in learning. That also decreases hyperarousal and hypervigilance. And one of the ways that we do this is also by increasing the sense of safety and an awareness of that sense of safety in children and young people. So if children and young people are regularly being reset to between 0 and 98, they're not getting into big emotions, so they'll have a greater sense of safety. When we increase self-regulation and self-management, we really need to help children and young people to understand their emotions and bodily states and be able to respond to them helpfully before they get to that 99. And this really did happen when children and young people regularly did interoception activities. So that meant doing them 2 to 3 times a day for just 1 to 5 minutes each time. It is not a very intense program. It just takes a while. So there is a lot of research other than mine that says you can increase engagement in learning through improving interoceptive awareness. And what we did that was a bit different was we did it as a holistic school program. So every child in the class did this. It was just done as a regular part of classroom teaching. So it was a very inclusive, proactive behaviour support. Now, I'm not going to go to questions yet. I'm going to ask the lovely Valencia to take my sharing off, and I will stop sharing, and I'm going to show you the hand model of the brain as well. So stop screen share. Right, can everybody see me now, Valencia, do you think? Excellent. So
Yes.
in the hand model of the brain, as you saw, say the reptile sits in the middle of your palm. So that's your survival instinct. Now, when in this model, the part that is connected to your brainstem, which is your wrist, is the part that's in control of the person. So in this state, your survival brain, your reptile brain, is in control of you. You fold your thumb in, that's when your emotions are in control of you. Fold your fingers down. Now your thinking cap of the brain is in control of you, and you can use your mindful awareness, which is here. So the other kind of name for interoception is mindful body awareness. So that's how you can see why that's so important, the mindfulness part. Now, as you get stressed or distressed, what happens is those chemicals and hormones change the brain, and the thinking cap of the brain starts to lift off. So this is your 0 to 99. So we're going up, up, up in numbers, up, up, up in numbers, and this is 99. So at this point, you can see your mindful awareness is not connected, the thinking cap is not connected. So even though the thinking cap is not connected after 0, you can still use it until it's sort of about here, and then it's really not as useful. Get up to 98, 99, not useful at all. The emotions are now in control, and they're your big emotions. And this is really important because big emotions create even more stress and distress hormones and chemicals in your body, and that happens. So you literally can, it looks like you do this, going from 0 to 100 like that, but what's happening is I feel fine because I don't feel anything, don't feel anything, don't feel anything, don't feel anything. Everybody around me feels something. Oops, lost it. So when we talk about an autistic meltdown, often this is what's happened, and they're in this state. It's not an autistic meltdown. It's actually a survival mode. It's a fight, flight, freeze, flop, or drop response because the person has got so overwhelmed because they got into big emotions and they didn't realize they were getting there. So hopefully that makes a lot of sense and helps you to really understand how children and young people can seem fine and then just lose it, and nobody knows what the trigger was, or they say the trigger was I said no, or they couldn't have what they want. But it wasn't. It was all these things, you said no here, and what it was is it was just one more stressor, and that one more stressor just went like this. Okay.
Thank you so much, Emma. That was so insightful. I mean, I thought I knew a little bit about interoception, but there's so many layers to it. So now, if our audience members, if they have any comments or questions, this is the time to ask. So I'll give us a minute or so to write chat.
So Valenza, I think you will be able to send everybody a copy of the talk. So
Yeah, so all of our registered attendees will talk like Emma said. And so if you want to see, we have a few more. See this as well, Emma?
yes. So if you want a copy of all the activities that I talk about in terms of interoception activities, there's a curriculum, and you can use that with anyone from birth to the other end of age. And where a child or young person is still too small to have control over their own body, for example, a baby, then you can do hand over hand. And it's about talking things through. So the whole thing about interoception is that you're providing the language as well. And if a child or young person doesn't use speech, that's not a problem. You can use POD or Proto2Go or any other AAC device or sign to do that language as well. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to just demonstrate an interoception activity for you so you can really understand what I mean. So you could do this with any young child. And this is a really great activity for before children learn to write, because it gives them really good interoceptive awareness of their hand. So I'm going to hold my hand up here so you can see it, but I'm just relaxed, right? It's just floppy relaxed. And you get the child or young person to floppy relax their hands, and you do it too. So you always need to model and join in these. So these are really inclusive activities. And then what we're going to do is we're going to stretch it. So maybe if you can all do this, so just hold your hands floppy, relaxed. So Valenza's going to copy me. It's like I didn't buy into this. And now we're going to stretch our hands. Now, as you can see, I don't have a very good stretch, right? This is actually my hands stretching as good as they can. Valenza, can you stretch yours wider? Excellent. Good stretch hands. Now this is mine. If your child or young person can't, you can help them by stretching a couple of their fingers apart. And what you do is you just hold it stretched. Now if you've got a really young child, you'd only do about 30 seconds. If you've got an older child or adult, you'd hold it for about a minute. And now you relax again, and you can point with one hand to the other hand where you felt something different in your body between relaxed and stretched. So for me, I felt it very much today along the back of my fingers. Okay, Valenza, where did you feel yours?
I felt some tension right here.
Okay, so at the top of the palm of your hand. Now, if you do this with a whole class, or even just in your family, or even just repeatedly, you'll find that children feel it in different places on different days, or nowhere at all. So what you then do is you always do an interoception activity a second time, and you guide people where to notice. So everybody's going to try this again. And what you're going to do now when we stretch it, we're actually going to focus on feeling that back of the fingers. Now, if you can't feel it, try wiggling the stretch around a little bit until you can feel something. Okay, now if it hurts, it will stop hurting when we stop doing this, and that's very important to tell children and young people too. Okay, so excellent. Valenza, could you feel that more this time in the back of your fingers?
Yeah, I noticed that if I drew my mind's attention to it, I can sort of notice those sensations.
Yeah. And that's that active perception, that conscious noticing. That's what interoception is. And that's why it's really good to do that guided thing. So there's a whole curriculum that's free. It's called Ready to Learn. If you put in Ready to Learn interoception in Google, it will come up on the South Australian Department for Education website. And you can download that for free. You can also download it from my website, but for some unknown reason, it charges people money if they're outside of Australia. I don't know why, and I don't know how to fix that. So go to the South Australian Department for Education where it's free, and you can just do one activity 3 times a day, or 3 different activities once a day, and just keep rotating them. Do them as often as you want, and that will absolutely help your child develop the ability to self-regulate, because without that interoceptive awareness, they can never self-regulate. I hope that answers the question, Jack.
Yeah, that's really useful. That was my question. Some easy and accessible interoceptive activity parents and educators can use alike.
And also, if you have younger children or children for whom it's appropriate, I've got some videos on that Healthy Possibilities YouTube channel that you can just press play, and you and the children and young people can do the activities together. And so you don't have to feel out of your depth doing them. You could just use the videos to start off with, and then do some from the Ready to Learn kit. So there's some that are animal poses. So there's a great for preschoolers and early childhood and sort of reception year 1. And then there are some that are for older people as well. And then you could transition into using the Ready to Learn kit when you feel confident. And it's really simple. It has photographs of each of the ways that your body would be, and it has some dot points of the prompts that you read out. So it's really, really simple.
Fantastic. So for those watching, I've linked Dr. Goodall's website, Healthy Possibilities, below. And you can also see more videos of interoceptive activities in action on Dr. Goodall's YouTube channel, Healthy Possibilities. This is me. So I'll be sending, as I said, registered attendees with the slides from today. If you weren't registered and you'd like to receive the slides, you can email info@sentalk.org. Let me see. So if we don't have any other questions, is it all right if I forward those on to you, Emma?
Yes, I was just going to share one more resource. So this is one of my favorite things. I love these. Okay, this is a hydration chart. So this tells you the color of your wee and whether or not you've drunk enough water. Now, one of the interesting things for many autistics is we take a very long time to toilet train. And many of us don't actually have good interoceptive awareness of our bladders. And those of us who link drinking and being able to go to the toilet will often not drink because we don't want to have an accident at school, particularly once we're school age. So when you share something like this, you don't need interoceptive awareness of your bladder in order to fully hydrate, which means then you have a full bladder, which is easier to then develop interoceptive awareness of. So I really like these. I also have a Bristol stool chart that's very wonderful. If people don't know Bristol stool charts, this is what your poo looks like. And kids on the spectrum and adults often suffer from constipation, and constipation is known to occur when you're often in your fight-flight zone. If you're often in survival instinct, your gut slows down because you don't want to be pooing while you're running away from the tiger because it will find you and eat you. So there's some of these are freely available on the Positive Partnerships website if you search interoception in that. And I created those specifically for using with children and young people on the autism spectrum. So they're really explicit, very literal language. And the Bristol stool chart has a bit on the bottom that you can use in the home so that you can record what number type your child's stools are, which is just the other word for poo if you're medical. And then you can take that to a GP if your child is suffering from constipation, because it needs to be treated. Constipation is linked directly to challenging behaviour as well. It's very hard to self-regulate if you're constipated, because in the hand model of the brain, your body is actually quite stressed and distressed when you're constipated. So you'll be doing this all the time.
Wonderful. I'll be sure to link that as well in the follow-up material. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, is there anything else you wanted to share, Dr. Goodall, before we close our session?
I think the only thing that I'd like to share as sort of a takeaway is, if you have a child or young person that really seems to be dysregulated, not able to manage their emotions and feelings helpfully, frequently think about, do they not have good interoception? Do they not know what they're feeling before it's cue? And are they in survival mode? Is this not behavior of choice? Are they just in that survival instinct mode? Because that makes a difference to how you respond to children and young people. And too often we label particularly children and young people on the spectrum, but also those with mental health difficulties, as naughty or violent and aggressive. And in actual fact, all they are is in survival mode.
Mm-hmm. Such an important detail and takeaway. Thank you. So thank you for everyone joining us. I hope this has been useful. It's been very informative for me, and I'm sure for our community. And thank you, Emma, for your time and energy today. I'm so grateful for it. Yeah. So I'll see you soon. We have another thank you. All right.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It was nice to be able to do something for part of the world that I spent years in and started my career off in. So thank you.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. All right. Okay. Thank you. for those viewing, and I'll see you soon.